Hello everyone, and welcome to the K-means clustering with Python lecture. In this lecture, we will show you how to use scikit-learn in Python to actually implement the K-means clustering algorithm. We'll also show you how you can create artificial data with scikit-learn's capabilities. Let's go ahead and jump to a Jupyter Notebook to get started. Okay, here I am at the Jupyter Notebook. Remember that K-means clustering is an unsupervised learning algorithm, and it tries to cluster data based on their similarity. What I'm going to go ahead and do to get started is import some visualization libraries. Seaborn as SNS, import matplotlib.pyplot as PLT, and since I'm using the Jupyter Notebook, matplotlib inline setting. Remember, this unsupervised learning means that we're not actually trying to predict any sort of outcome. What we're trying to do is actually find patterns in the data. And in K-means clustering, we're going to have to specify the number of clusters we want the data to be grouped in. What I'm going to go ahead and do now is show you how you can use scikit-learn to generate some artificial data. We'll use artificial data for this lecture, and in the next lecture for your portfolio project, we'll go ahead and switch back to using some real data. But this is a useful thing to know when you want to just kind of play around with some algorithms. You can say from sklearn.datasets import, and you can import a method called make_blobs. And if you go ahead and check out the documentation string for make_blobs, this basically generates blob-like groups of data that you can go ahead and add cluster standard deviations to, say how many features you want, how many centers, and it will allow you to basically make artificial data that you can then play with. Let me go ahead and use it to make some data. So I'm going to say number of samples. We'll go ahead and make 200 samples. We'll state that the number of features is 2, so there's 2 features here. Centers, we'll say that there's 4 centers to these blobs, and we'll go ahead and add a little bit of cluster standard deviation to be 1.8, and then finally I'm going to put in a random state. So I'll say random state is equal to 101, and you should use the same random state I do, so your blobs are the same as mine. Now that we've created this data, we can go ahead and explore it a bit. If we just look at data itself, you'll notice that it's actually a tuple. And if you grab the first element in that tuple, you'll have a NumPy array. And this NumPy array is basically your number of samples and then 2 columns of features. So if we actually grab the shape of this, it's 200 by 2. So this was the 200 samples and it has 2 features. And within this random data, it will actually have 4 blobs in it. Let's go ahead and plot out these blobs so we can get a better idea of what this is actually doing. I'm going to say data 0, and then grab all the rows in the first column and plot those against data 0, all the rows in the second column. And if I just plot this, I get this. And I can see that there's seem to be 2 blobs here. So what I actually need to do is grab the second item in that tuple. And if I look at that second item, this is actually the cluster that it belongs to. So 0, 1, 2, and 3. And that's from these centers. So there's 4 centers to these blobs. So I'm going to say C is equal to data of 1. And by default, it'll show a black and white or a grayscale color mapping. So I'm going to go ahead and say CMap is equal to the string rainbow, so it's a little more clear, the 4 blobs here. And this is how you can use scikit-learn to create some artificial data for clustering. And this is what I actually used back in your earlier exercises where you had some artificial or fake data. I just used the make blobs method in order to do that. So it's a pretty cool tool you can use to play around with some of these machine learning algorithms when you don't want to deal with a real data set. You can just make your own, add cluster standard deviation to make it harder for yourself to actually distinguish blobs, but we'll work with this for now. We can see one blob is quite distinct and the other 3 are a little noisy between each other. What we're going to go ahead and do now is show you how you can use scikit-learn to create a k-means clustering algorithm. We'll say from sklearn.cluster import k-means. And remember, k-means is unsupervised. Whoops. This should be k capital M means. And remember, like I was saying, k-means is unsupervised. And this algorithm is going to just start off by randomly assigning each observation to a cluster and then finds the centroid of each cluster. Then the algorithm will iterate through the two steps. Remember, it reassigns data points to the cluster whose centroid is closest, it calculates the new centroid for each cluster, and then it just repeats that over and over again until the cluster variation can't be reduced any further. All right, let's go ahead and show you then how we can use this k-means. I'll make an object called k-means with lowercase k and lowercase m, and then call k-means. And remember, with k-means, I have to know the number of clusters beforehand. And in this case, I'm lucky. I expect 4 clusters since I created the data myself. So we'll go ahead and say n clusters is equal to 4. And then we're going to go ahead and k-means dot fit it to the features. And the features are just data 0, what we plotted earlier. And now this will report back to me lots of methods and also attributes. If I just want the centers of the clusters, I can ask for those, and it will return back an array of the actual centers of the clusters. So you can go ahead and plot those if you want. But more importantly, it will report back with labels underscore the labels it believes to be true for the clusters. Now, something that's really important to keep in mind is if you were working with real data and you didn't have the labels, you would be done at this stage. You would not be able to actually compare anything to the real values. But since we actually do know the labels from data 1, so if we take a look at data 1 again, these are the correct labels that we created for this artificial data, and these are our predicted labels. Now again, k-means clustering is unsupervised, so you wouldn't use it to actually predict labels. You would use it to try to find labels in your data. And you would do that by kind of exploring the number of clusters. But let me show you, by plotting this out, how the k-means compares to our original. So I'm going to use matplotlib to do this. I will say fig, and then x1, x2 is equal to plt dot subplots 1 by 2. I'm going to specify Sherry is equal to true, so they share an axis. And then finally, I'm going to say fig size is 10 by 6. And I'm going to state that x1, and essentially I'm just using tuple unpacking here. I'm saying x1.set underscore title is k-means. So we'll do the first one as k-means. Oops. So I'll take x1 and call scatter off of it with data of 0. And we'll go ahead and plot the data again. And all the rows in the second column. And this color will be defined by k-means dot labels underscore. And we'll go ahead and leave it at that. I'm going to copy and paste this code on the second set of axes, ax2. This is going to be original, so the original data. And we're going to go ahead and say, instead of this color being by the labels, the color will just be like we did previously by 1. And then we're going to go ahead and add a CMap here. Say CMap is rainbow for both of them. CMap equals rainbow. Let me break down what we're doing real quick before I actually run this. I'm creating a subplot of 1 row by 2 columns. Sherry equals true allows them to share the same axes. And then I'm using tuple unpacking to actually grab these 2 set of axes. This first set of axes is going to plot my original data, and it's going to color that data based off of what my algorithm thought the labels should look like. My other plot here at ax2, again, is going to plot the original data, but it's going to color them by their actually factually correct blobs, assignments. Let's go ahead and do this and see what we get. All right, So the coloring is a little different, so you don't have to worry about that too much. But what you can do is kind of zoom in on some of these points and see how they differ from the original. So right here in this noisy section is where our algorithm wasn't able to really detect which group belonged to which point, or which point belonged to which group. So you can see here in the true data set, there's some noise here, but essentially k-means just decided it couldn't deal with that noise and assigned them all to the same centroid cluster there. So you should note again that these colors are just meaningless and they only really reference within each of their own plots. So that doesn't mean that yellow is the same as yellow over here in the original, it's just a way of coloring stuff. Let me go ahead and show you what would happen if we set k-means, number of clusters, equal to 2, and just ran all this again. So if I just do Shift-Enter all the way, this would be if k-means equal to 2. So here's our original with the 4 clusters, and this is what k-means would think if you just had to do this with 2 clusters. What about 3 clusters? Let's go ahead and see what k-means would think 3 appropriate clusters were. And this is also what I believe a human would kind of guess. 1 cluster here, this kind of larger cluster, and this cluster. And we can actually keep going and get some, let's say 8 clusters, so just double the amount of clusters. And you'll see here what k-means thinks the clusters are. All right, so keep in mind that k-means is an unsupervised learning algorithm. You would usually not have labeled data like we did. We were lucky enough that we actually knew the labels. That was data 1, that second array in the tuple. And k-means, what it tries to do is actually give you those labels. And here we're fortunate enough where we can actually compare in order to understand k-means more fully. All right, hope you enjoyed that lecture. Again, it's a pretty simple process for using k-means with scikit-learn. You just say from sklearn.cluster, import k-means, then instantiate k-means with the number of clusters you expect or want to explore, fit it to your features, your data. Again, since this is unsupervised, you're not going to have those labels. And then you can report back the cluster centers if you wanted them. But more importantly, you can report back the labels. All right, hope you enjoyed that. And as a little side note, again, maybe play around with the data equals make blobs and see what else you can do with this particular notebook. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next lecture where we will go over your portfolio project for k-means clustering.